This talk is about argument, scientific argument, and how to construct it in a dissertational thesis using critical thought. Now, normally, scientific argument, which is not argument the way we know it, where you're fighting and swearing and fisticuffs, a scientific argument is a reasoned debate about a topic. You normally use it in your literature review and in your discussion, in your thesis. Now, there are a couple of things we have to first understand, and that is to distinguish between what is an argument and an assumption. And also, as usual, I'm going to ask you to put your finger on the pause button every now and again, because there's quite a bit of reading on the slides. So I want you to pause and read, whereas I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to carry on talking. But let's get back to an argument and an assumption. An argument is a claim or a series of linked claims that is substantiated with evidence. An assumption is a belief which is unsupported by evidence. So if we look at this cartoon, Linus has an argument, whereas Lucy has an assumption. So an argument is used in science because it's always substantiated with evidence. Now, this and the next two slides deal with this paragraph, and I want you to read through it carefully and then answer these questions. Okay, I'm going to carry on talking, but you must probably will have paused. Now, the question is, what arguments are contained within the paragraph? Are the arguments persuasive? What assumptions are contained within the paragraph? Or are the assumptions persuasive? As we look at it, there's not a single reference. So there's not a single argument in this paragraph. It's all assumptions. But let's just look at something a little bit further in this paragraph, which make it for quite illogical reading. What is meant by epidemic proportions of crime and violence? How do you define that? What do they mean? The newspapers are full of stories of fraud, theft, rape, etc. Now, what do they mean the newspapers are full? Do they mean there is one article in every newspaper that you read? Or is there an article on fraud, theft, rape, and so on every single page? Or does it mean that the newspapers are full from the front page to the last? There's no sports, there's no smalls, there's no adverts, there's nothing. The whole paper is filled with stories of fraud, theft, and rape. You don't know what is meant there. It's undefined. There's a deep moral crisis. What is a moral crisis? What is a deep moral crisis? If you decide that you're not going to go to church that Sunday, are you now in a deep moral crisis and therefore you need to be hung because they want to bring back capital punishment? There's a leap of logic here. It doesn't make sense. So you need to understand arguments and assumptions in addition to looking at the language which is being used in the argument, so-called argument. Now, I've had a newspaper reference here, the Argus. The most dangerous places for South Africans to be is at their workplace or in their own homes. I ask you, has the newspaper reference changed the nature of the arguments or assumptions within the paragraph? Well, sort of, but a newspaper article is not a primary reference. A primary reference comes from a journal article which has been peer reviewed. So there might be a little bit of evidence here, but doesn't hold water with me. And now I've changed the reference to the 6 monthly crime statistics, which the South African Police Services puts out every 6 months. And according to their data, most South Africans are attacked in their homes and in their workplaces. So has the type of reference changed the nature of the arguments or assumptions in the paragraph? Yes, because this is a credible reference, but only for that sentence. It doesn't give any rigor to the epidemic proportions or the newspapers which are full of stories or the moral crisis or capital punishment. Only for that sentence, because where the reference is placed. So, when you want to develop a well-formed argument, keep this in the back of your mind, everything that I've told you about the emotive language and everything. Firstly, you need to adopt a particular stance or make a particular proposition, which is the claim. That is what your argument is about. You need to support that claim with evidence, as I've told you, because that is science. Then you need to provide a warrant. Now, a warrant is your explanation why the data or the evidence or the reference proves your claim, supports your claim. And it's very important that you structure your argument and supporting evidence together. You can't have an argument in one place and your supporting evidence in another place on the other page of your writing. Then step back and critically examine the logic of your argument and see if you've written anything about moral crises or newspapers which are full or crimes of epidemic proportion. Critically examine what you've written. Then you need to add a counterclaim, because if you don't give all sides of the story, you're going to be accused of bias. Once again, stand back, examine the logic of the counterclaim, and then give your rebuttal of the counterclaim, where you say you think it's wrong, or you accept that counterclaim. So as my example, which I'm going to use, is the following. And I've put it in a flow chart so you can see what I'm talking about. I'm saying, for instance, that road traffic injury in South Africa has got nothing to do with Drive Alive and why Drive Alive is not working. You all know about Drive Alive. Every Christmas, every Easter, campaign to make people aware of driving carefully and safely along the roads. And you get all the politicians in their little yellow reflective vests standing by the roadside, advising people and talking to the TV. So my claim here is that poor infrastructure is the cause of road traffic injury, not the poor awareness which Drive Alive is promoting. And I've got 3 issues. Of course, I can put in many, many more issues, but I'm just going to put in 3. Our first issue is about the increasing vehicles which are on the road. We've got far more vehicles per inhabitant than we used to have, and there's government data to support that. So there's a higher concentration of vehicles on the roads. Poor policing. I have subdivided this because there's a lot on poor policing and traffic policing that I can talk about. But I say the training is poor. And I can give a journal article to show that the training is poor. Bribery. We all know you get stopped by the road, or not, we all know it does happen. You might flash 100 Rand, or else the traffic cop might ask for a cool drink. And you go on your merry way if you've been, even though after you've done the most appalling traffic violation. And another issue, which I can put up, is road maintenance. Pothole data, plenty of it. Civil engineering reports indicating how the roads are crumbling. These are all my references to show that these 3 items of infrastructure add to road traffic injury. So do you understand that? How you've got different issues to support your argument. So before you can actually have a good and strong argument, you need to have a good understanding of the general topic area. So I've just given you 3 issues: road infrastructure, policing, and higher traffic volumes. So these all add to my argument. And you need to read broadly and comprehensively to really obtain a good grasp of all the issues. Students have often said, oh, I know all about it. And you ask, well, how many papers have you read on it? And they say 3. I hardly think that 3 papers will tell you all about a certain problem, issue. Then you need to identify the components of your topic areas so you can focus your argument. I've shown you those 3 topic areas, with the policing having 2 subtopics. Then you must think about the points you want to make, and each point should be supported by evidence. You're going to have to find that evidence. Because without evidence, you have an assumption, you don't have a scientific argument. Now, I suggest you use a flow chart to help organize your argument, because you firstly need to now plan a structure for your argument. And you need to use critical thought. And remember, part of doing research is to develop critical thought, to order your points and the evidence you have gathered. Now, you may have to redo your flow chart, because sometimes you've got all your points and issues, but that doesn't flow logically. So you need to rearrange things. So this is why I have suggested you use either a flow chart, and I've used Smart Art in PowerPoint to just put this together. But PowerPoint and the whole Word package is a little bit inflexible. So one of my students suggested using Lucid Chart, which is free. It's free software. You can download it. It's far more flexible to make flow charts or mind maps or organizational charts. And a lot of my students have used it. So can I point you to Lucid Chart in case you find PowerPoint very restrictive? What I also do with my students, and I find it very useful myself, I use these sticky notes to order my argument with, it's actually running along like this, order my argument and give evidence and data as well that I want to use. Or else what I do prefer is it's slightly bigger, get an A4 piece of paper, cut it to 6 equal pieces, write down your issues, write down your evidences, write down your counter arguments and your warrants and your rebuttals, and you can organize it like that. It's much, much easier. And it's easier to reorganize rather than doing it electronically. And of course, you've got an entire table where you can, or the floor even, where you can arrange these pieces of paper. I've spoken about counter-argument, and I've said that you have to address the claims of the opposition to build a convincing argument. Because if you have researched the multiple sides of the argument, it indicates that you have come to an informed decision, you are credible, and you've been rigorous. So here we come back to my flow chart of my argument, and I have to add counter argument. Okay, my first counter argument here that I found is a good driver is always aware. Now that is common sense. You don't actually need a reference for that. A good driver is always aware. Now you could argue perhaps that you sometimes are tired, but a good driver, when they're aware that they're tired, stop. So that is common sense as a counter argument. In a counter argument here, per training, someone could come up and say that training is actually excellent. Excellent, because the modules are excellent when it comes to training the police. The testing is appropriate. The curriculum has been accredited by the teaching department. So I can't actually say in my argument the training is poor. When it comes to bribery, the bribery of traffic cops, it's not always true. And there are references to, not every cop is going to ask for a bribe or accept a bribe. And the counter argument here when it comes to road maintenance, in the Western Cape, they're very good roads, but yet the road deaths are still high. And there are reports there to substantiate that. So that's the counter argument. Then you need to add a rebuttal to the argument and the counter argument in your flow chart. A good driver is always aware, I can't counter that. It's true. So there's certainly no counter claim in this case. When it comes to my claim saying that training is poor, the counter argument is training is excellent, but then I'm saying that there is seldom any upskilling and there's seldom any an ongoing continuing education. And I can prove that from data, say for instance, for the South African Journal of Crime and Policing. I can do that. I can also use that same journal when I talk about bribery. There is a perception in the newspapers, which has been of many reports, where they say that bribes are occurring. Now, of course, if I use a newspaper as a reference, that then, it depends on the reader whether they're going to accept it or not. Because if I say this is the perception from the newspapers, it's up to the person to decide whether I'm being right or wrong. And finally, when it comes to the Western Cape and the increased deaths, this is partially true. But what I could say then is that a lot of the deaths are due to alcoholism, because we know from the Medical Research Council reports, alcoholism is rife in the Western Cape. So do you see how I've made a claim? There is a counterclaim, and then I've given a rebuttal to the counterclaim. I've re-argued that through. So writing your argument and the supporting evidence is absolutely crucial in order to make your point of view clear. You need to have a series of paragraphs, and your argument should develop logically from one paragraph to the next paragraph. Because if you suddenly put the issue of policing, say bribery, and you put that after road maintenance, so you've got higher traffic volume, you've then got poor training of police, and then you've got road maintenance, and you go back to the issue of bribery, it is not logical. Remember, each paragraph should convey only one or two main points, no more than that. Each point is communicated in a topic sentence to alert the reader what has been covered in the paragraph. You need supporting sentences to back up the argument. And finally, your conclusion ends up in the final sentence with a get it conclusion. You must make your conclusion very, very clear. So if you look at your layout, this would perhaps be one paragraph with your get it conclusion. That would be another paragraph, or perhaps another subsection, another subheading under policing. This would be another paragraph or two, depending on how you argue it. And this would be another paragraph. In each case, your conclusion must be quite clear, a real get it conclusion. So once you've written your stance, check, check, and check again. You've got supporting evidence. You've got your warrants. You've got your counter argument and the rebuttal, also perhaps supported by warrants. And remember, the warrant says why the data or the evidence proves your claim, supports your claim. Structure your points meaningfully and coherently, and then critically examine the logic of your argument. Written out, it must follow, it must be logically coherent, the argument must be sound, and the conclusions must derive from what you have presented in the form of your argument, your propositions, your evidence, must all indicate critical thought. Now, the problem with arguments when it comes to students, and I've used the word argumentation. I hate the word, it's an Americanism, but it suits what I want to say. This is the summary of what I've told you. But most students stop at the third step. They illustrate the point, they give references, but they don't discuss the illustration. So there's no warrant, as it is indicated here. Show how the examples say what you say they say. So there's a total absence of any critical thought, and you don't say how your interpretation substantiates your point of argument. So don't just trot out 5 or 6 references by view of illustration or evidence, and then not say what they are saying. So to finish, in summary, you have a claim in your argument, your scientific argument, and you have a reason to back it up. You've got evidence to prove your claim, and you explain what they say. You've got counterclaims and rebuttals to show you've looked at every single aspect of the thing, even when other people do not say what you are saying, and you reach a conclusion. Can I just suggest you look at Cecile Badenhorst's YouTube presentation on arguments in thesis research writing? This is the link. Otherwise, you can just type Cecile Badenhorst and this into your Google search, and it'll come up. It's really a very good YouTube. Thank you. That's all that I'm going to say. But I just want to conclude with James Schlesinger's quotation. Everyone is entitled to their own view, but everyone is not entitled to their own facts. Facts are facts, and they belong to everyone. So you can't make up your own facts when it comes to scientific argument. Thank you so much.